Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to give our participants a moment to come into the webinar, and we'll start in just 30 seconds. Okay, let's start. Welcome to the fourth showcase of the Conservation Finance Alliance Incubator. We are thrilled to have presentations from the cohort. This is our third cohort of the CFA Incubator. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, and we've been supporting 10 projects over the last year and really thrilled to have them present uh, where they are right now in their trajectory. And today you will hear two projects that work with trust funds and investment funds. So these are trust funds as engines for nature finance. And we'll hear about a conservation trust fund in Cuba and a biodiversity and climate fund in Madagascar and Africa. And the CFA Incubator has been supported by a range of partners, including Milky Wire through their Nature Transformation Fund in partnership with Klarna, and a whole range of other supporters you can see down below. And we've had the great support of Octo for this webinar series. So thank you so much to Sarah Carr and Octo for working with us to get this out here. And a shout out to Stephanie O'Donnell, who's the incubator manager, who's done an amazing job supporting all these projects. So we're also got the fourth round of the CFA Incubator coming up this year. We've closed the call for proposals back in December, and we had an overwhelming interest and over 235 different applications. We're in the process of reviewing them and look forward to announcing 16 new members of the cohort 4 starting sometime in March. So, and one more bit of logistics is we do have the fifth session coming up on the 12th at 12 noon Eastern time. Please plan to join that for us. Well, there's links in the Octo newsletter, and there are notices on LinkedIn as well. So we have two presentations. We'll start with Miarakap, which is a biodiversity and climate technical assistance facility as part of a larger blended finance fund that will support projects in Madagascar and Eastern and Southern Africa. And that'll be presented by Blanda, Andrimamy, and Méléard of Miarakap. And that will be followed by Cresta Coastal Network presenting about a conservation trust fund and work they're doing in Cuba. And that will be Fernando Bretos Treyes, who's the founder and director of Cresta Coastal Network, which is a project of the Ocean Foundation. And so we'll start with Miarakap. Each project will have about 25 minutes of your time to present and then answer questions. Please put your questions into the Q&A box down below. And please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat and let us know where you're from. And don't hesitate to share resources. And but do please put your questions in the Q&A section. That makes it easier for us to track. So without further ado, thank you all for joining, and I'll pass it to the team from Miarakap.
Thank you, David. Um, so I think we have a presentation. Okay. Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Leah, and together with my colleague Blanda, we're really happy to present you the mid-year technical assistance facility project that was supported by CFA Incubation. And I really want to warmly thank the CFA team, especially Stephanie, David, and Benjamin for the support over the last 9 months. So this initiative is led by two companies. The first one is Miarakap, where I work, is a Malagasy investment fund, so based in Madagascar, in Kinome, and I will hand over to Blanda to present Kinome.
So Kinome is a French enterprise, a social enterprise based in France with 20 years of experience here in Madagascar in sustainable value chain, in impact measurement, and in biodiversity and nature-based solution.
Yes, thank you, Blanda. And so 2 years ago, these two organizations decided to partner and to create a new impact investment vehicle named the Mid-Tier Biodiversity and Climate Fund. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Mid-Tier Biodiversity and Climate Fund, that we call MBCF, is a $50 million blended finance closed fund that will invest in local SMEs, mainly in Madagascar, but also in Mozambique and the Comoros, with debt and equity tools. So we are aiming to finance biodiversity and climate SMEs, so to ease pressure on natural capital. And so we start this process of raising the fund 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago. And we're really happy to have a deadline now and to be able, we hope, to close this summer and to then be fully operational early 2027. So maybe just before entering into the details, we want to give you a small indication of why we decided to create this vehicle. And I will hand over to Blanda.
Thanks, Leah.
Go to
yes,
the next
we
slide.
we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned, our focus will be mainly Madagascar, but we will focus on in Mozambique and Comoros too. And to set the scene, let me start with the context on the ground in the Western Indian Ocean. So we are operating in one of the most unique and the most fragile region on the planet. For example, for Madagascar, it hosts around 5% of the global biodiversity, with a 90% of endemicity, and the island experienced major forest loss. We talk about 80% of lost from the original forest, and this region is highly vulnerable to climate shock too. And at the same time, poverty is a key driver of environmental degradation. In Madagascar, we talk about 80% of people who lives under the line of extreme poverty. It's the same case in Mozambique, and they are in rural areas, many of them. So when formal jobs are scarce, many households have limited options to secure their livelihoods and end up really indirectly on natural capital, mainly through unsustainable practice such as slash and burn agriculture and charcoal production. But in front of this, we have our point is simple. SMEs can be powerful catalysts. They create jobs, increase incomes, and can adopt sustainable practices. But they are facing barriers too. Fewer than 15% can access to long-term finance, and they are facing important gaps in terms of skills, infrastructure, energy, market access, and administrative capacity. So in short, the opportunity is huge, but the growth engine is underfueled. That is the bottleneck that mid-series is designed to unlock. So based on this reality, we choose to turn this constraint into opportunity. So next slide, please. So what we want to do, and we hope, we are convinced to do, is to replace the same that you can see on your left by the same that you can see on your right. So replaced poverty by creating jobs and by supporting SMEs, especially nature positive SMEs. So let's deep dive into it. How concretely we will tackle it. The floor is yours, Leah.
Okay, thank you. If we can go to the next slide. And the next, sorry. Okay, so what we want to do concretely is really to create a blended finance vehicle. That means that we will have two separate but related entities. On one hand, the MBCF, so the fund, the main fund, and on the other hand, a technical assistance facility. We are aiming to raise $5 million to support the SMEs by supporting them with grant. So how they related, we will have two separate and independent teams for both entities, but the pipeline of the technical assistance facility will be provided by MBCF. So here, a blended finance solution means that the fund will provide the capital, but the TAF, the technical assistance facility, will provide the capabilities for the SMEs we want to support. The TA facility does not exist without the fund, and so in the next slide, I will present briefly what is the strategy of MBCF. Okay, thank you. So MBCF is a fund that we want to support over 15 companies on projects going to sustainable use of natural resources, nature-based solutions, and climate change mitigation. We are looking at 4 main sectors: agribusiness, tourism, renewable energy, and agroforestry. So with equity and debt, we want to support companies with tickets from $1 to $5 million. And we want to support them with a TA facility of $5 million, as we said, over Madagascar, the Comoros, and Mozambique. But in these countries, in these emerging countries with, and especially in Madagascar, not deep markets, companies and sometimes big companies don't have the formalization or don't have all capacities to be supported by investors. And that's why the TA facility is really important in this solution. If we can go to the next slide, please, thank you. So the TA facility will be supporting the SMEs with 4 key points. 2, before investment, so what we call investment readiness. That only means that we will support SMEs to be able to attract and to be able to absorb capital from the fund. So we will support them before any investment, to prepare them and to de-risk their growth. Then, when the companies will be in our portfolio, we will invest in these SMEs, will be support them to sustainably grow. That means we will help them on their ESG impacts, improvements, to be able to measure impact and to be able to put into places implement projects regarding the local communities, regarding conservations, and so on. So why we need this to be supported by grant? Because companies, as I said, are not always ready for investment and need grant, need support that public health can't provide, or that private sector can provide sometimes, to go on projects that are not lucrative or won't directly benefit to the companies, but are really important for their sustainable growth. And then that's what we call, on the next slide, please, a catalytic effect. Since the TA facility will be of $5 million, it means that every $1 that you invest in the TA facility will have an impact as $10 of investment through MBCF. And so this TA facility will really help the MBCF to be able to generate impact. And that's the strategy, the impact strategy of MBCF. So we're looking to improve lives, we're looking to create job, generate annual sales, obviously, but also to be able to sequester, reduce, and avoid GHG, and to manage sustainably lands where the companies are implemented. So if we go to the next slide, I will let Blanda explain to you in more detail and concrete way how we will support with the TA facility SMEs in Madagascar. Blanda, you
Yes. Yes. So here we have a first example of a spices firm. This case illustrates the fact that many companies can perform well operationally, but are not yet ready to absorb institutional capital. So this business is a vanilla and cloth exportation, and they work on diversified agricultural value chain too, like species, essentials, oils, and pulses, and they based their activity on sustainable practices and certification. So, as we mentioned earlier, one of the condition before our investment is to have the company ready. So for example, for this company, it is very important for us to ensure that they have an adapted financial tools to be ready for the investment. So post-investment, we can help them to formalize cooperative and their governance to ensure that they strengthen their value chain. And one of the point that this company really need to is to implement an impact measurement and management system, especially for environmental and social aspect. That's the first example. We can go to the next slide for the second example. So here we have an example of solar firm. So it's a company which specialized in renewable energy solution in Madagascar by implementing solar mini grid and hybrid solar system for communities, but for industrial clients too. So here one of the main point in terms of technical assistance is to scale their approach. The main approach is productive use of electricity. So it's a program to grow demand and customer incomes. So for example, we can, with the technical assistance, help them to train communities in small business to develop their business, and so the community, the local community, can increase their demand. And with technical assistance too, we can help the company to recruit key talent and to implement their and to improve their ESG, so their approach in terms of environmental, social, and governance, which is very important for institutional investment. So that's all for those two examples. I give the floor to Leah to conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Blanda. I hope we give you a concrete overview of what we want to build here with Mid-Year. As I said earlier, the fund is we are aiming to close in June, and we are already actively mobilizing financing for the TA facility. So if you have any question, or if you are interested in supporting or even partnership with this Mid-Year initiative, please don't hesitate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both to Blanda and Leah, for a great presentation. So again, if you do have questions, put them into the Q&A below, and we'll start off with one. I mean, you recognize, this is what your technical assistance facility is doing. You recognize how hard it is to get small to mid-sized enterprises ready for investment of any kind. How do you, what technical assistance are you planning to provide specifically to get these organizations, up to speed? How do you get this transformation? Because it seems to me that there's two types of tech TA that are needed. Is one is basic sort of business development, financial management, accounting, business strategy, and the other is around the sustainability piece. How are you going to provide that to these SMEs to get them really to the level that they need?
Yes, maybe I can answer this one, Blanda. So for the investment readiness part, so before investing with MBCF, how we plan to do it and how we are already doing it, because we're already supporting the SMEs of our pipeline in TA investment readiness. In fact, is the investment officer of MBCF that are looking at and are finding the needs of the companies, what we need for MBCF to be able to invest in if we want to be able to support them. And so it's really practical, because it's an investment officer that see what it's needed, and then go with the needs, the TA, to the technical assistance facility team that will independently support and frame and design what would be needed to support them actively. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Recognizing it is challenging to bring that support, but I think, as you say, you've had experience doing that. So, we had a question coming in, about who you're targeting for in terms of investment or donation for both tranches. So maybe you could provide, and just I think you gave the abbreviation MBCF. Maybe just to say out loud what that is, what the name of the fund is, so people can remember that.
Yes, so MBCF is for Mid-Year Biodiversity and Climate Fund. And so we are looking at DFIs, mainly Proparco, IFC, FMOs, and so on, for the main fund. A part of these DFIs would be able to support us also on the TA facility, but we are also looking at foundation for the TA facility. and philanthropics, physical person, donors.
Just
Right.
to add on what Leah said, we also develop a partnership with VVF. So we work closely with them to target over sources of grants to help the technical assistance facility to reach their goal in terms of amount and in terms of objectives.
Right. And so basically the TA facility is it's all grant funding basically. You have your investment fund, which is a blended finance stack, right? So there'll be a mix of different types of investors in that. Is there any grant money going to the blended finance facility, or is all the grant money going into the TA facility?
No grants for the for MBCF for the fund. We will have some tranches, junior and senior tranches, so with not the same level of expectation, but it's still an investment. It's not it's
Right.
not linear.
Perfect. So a classic blended finance return-based fund, but with different tranches and different risk return profiles.
But
Fantastic. No, very exciting and great to hear you've made great progress on that. And okay, questions come in here. So what's the difference between what you're doing and other like ag focused funds? So what would be the value added to the sort of finance ecosystem, um, of your fund compared to what else is out there? I'm not sure if you're able to answer that,
Um,
but it's
I
like a competitive benefit, kind of why is your fund different?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm familiar with AG fund, but well, in
Agricultural fund, agricultural investment funds. So, there's a range of sustainable agriculture funds that
hmm,
are out there.
okay. Do you want to go on that on this
yes,
one?
yes. So as we said earlier, we are very interested mainly with the agribusiness SMEs here in Madagascar because generally their business is based on sourcing their product from outcroppers, and outcroppers is mainly around the protected areas or around forest. So by generating these incomes for those people, we can ensure we can contribute to the main cause of degradation of the natural capital degradation, which is the poverty. But on top of apart from that, we are targeting over type of enterprise too, which is had impact on biodiversity with their business model. So we can talk about enterprise which is develop their activities in restoration, in carbon credit, maybe because the legislation here in Madagascar improved in that way. So the thing that I can say that we are more larger than an agricultural fund because we are targeting over sector. We are targeting renewable energy too, but what we want to do is to select the champion in their sector for each sector and help them to scale their activities to help them to not be in SMEs, but to be a very big enterprise and a very consequent enterprise here in their ecosystem.
Interesting. Because I was going to ask, so that's a great explanation. I was going to ask how you how you select and prioritize the companies trying to balance the biodiversity and climate impact with the potential for growth and profit. I know sometimes those are they're
Exactly.
hard to balance the trade-off. So how do you and I guess more importantly, how does the technical assistance choose to decide, what it supports, or is that just you're supporting all the projects that the investment fund chooses?
Yeah, you will go on this or I continue?
Bea, did you want to respond?
Okay, uh, so our target, as I said, is the SMEs champion in their sector, that the gap with the requirement of institutional investment is not really big as the SMEs or the startup that we have here in Madagascar. So we want really to help SMEs, the championing SMEs in their sector to bridge the gap by the technical assistance that we get them to help them to scale their business. So we will not target SMEs who can't absorb uh, less than $1 million. And for example, for Miarakap, for the first fund led by Miarakap, it's a fund who targeted startup level SMEs. So we want to bring another vision of investment here in Madagascar, and we think we are one of the very first in this sector.
Yeah, you're choosing a challenging country. There was a question about the political um,
Yeah,
instability, and from having tried to run a business in Madagascar myself, I know it's a challenging country to do
exactly.
business in. So, wishing you the best of luck and really a great initiative. We're very supportive of the fund and the technical assistance facility. So thank you so much for presenting, and thank you so much for this great work that you're doing, and wishing you the best of luck. And if you can maybe answer some of the other questions by writing, um, we're going to move on to Fernando. But again, thank you so much, Blanda and Leah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and good luck, Fernando.
Okay, so Fernando, over to you. We're very excited to hear about the a potential conservation trust fund in Cuba and the work that you've been doing to try to move that forward. So, without further ado, over to you. And I think Christine will share your slides. Or,
If I can, I will, if that's all
oh,
right.
okay. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
good.
Sure.
Okay, I will jump right into it. Now we're on the topic of working in difficult countries politically. Thanks, Leah and Blanda, a lot for the presentation. It's a good setup for mine. We're talking big island countries with lots of resources, high levels of biodiversity. So I will share my screen now. And I'm taking you to the other side of the world. Okay, continue to share. Yeah, good, beautiful. You can see it. So I'll take you to the other side of the world, to the beautiful Caribbean. And I'm going to talk about my CFA Incubator project. I want to thank Milky Wire and the other funders for this opportunity. It was just an amazing learning experience. Um, um, some things got flipped on their head, and that's where the learning ultimately came. So a big thanks as well to David and Stephanie for all the support. My name is Fernando. I am a conservation scientist. I'm based in North Carolina. I am Cuban. My parents left Cuba as orphans in 1960. And so I've worked on the island since 1999. become very close to the conservation community. I think you'll see through this presentation why we need to finance and support Cuba, a country that has been subject to very severe economic restrictions. But that's no reason to continue supporting the amazing work that's being done in Cuba by a very mature scientific community, very old scientific institutions. I am founder and director of Cresta Coastal Network, which is a project of the Ocean Foundation. This incubator project is a joint program between my parent organization, the Ocean Foundation, and my project. I'm going to tell you a bit about a mechanism which is to finance conservation in Cuba. And it's one that's pretty familiar to most people. I'm going to be talking about Cuba's National Conservation Trust Fund. So let me start with the whys. Why does Cuba matter? So there are many reasons. It's a massive island. It's about 1,000 kilometers long. So imagine if you're in the United States from the Virginia border all the way to Miami, about the size of Pennsylvania. 50% of plants are endemic. If you lined up Cuba's 4 coral reef chains, they'd be 3 times longer than the Mesoamerican reef. So Cuba is sort of a haven for mangrove habitat, seagrass, and coral habitat. Very mature scientific institutions. In fact, the Cuban Academy of Sciences was founded in 1861, so it actually predates the North American equivalent. So there's a lot of pride in the science that's developed in Cuba despite resource restrictions. You've probably heard it before. It's true. Cuban biologists make $25 a month. So the passion and the determination is like anywhere I've ever seen, and that alone merits considerable investment. The challenge, which I'll get to later, is how to get funding into Cuba. It's not just only because of the embargo, but it's a very rigid system that also in 7 decades hasn't liberalized enough, but it is happening. We're seeing considerable liberalization of the Cuban economy. So I like to show this map because this sort of says it all. The Caribbean is a very dynamic oceanographic system. The Gulf Stream is very influential in terms of how marine resources move, both passive migrators, so think larvae and lobster larvae, for example, and reef fish, but also active migrators. So think sharks, turtles. So they use this sort of oceanic highway to move about. In fact, if you measure the Gulf Stream between Mexico and Cuba, it's about 1 meter higher than the rest of the ocean because so much water is moving through. So there's a map as well that shows a lot of the protected areas that are at stake. It just shows sort of the islands of the stream hypothesis that if you're not protecting this massive landmass in Cuba, other countries, Bahamas, Bermuda, Florida, the Gulf, are suffering. Another reason is geographic. So in Cuba's coat of arms is a key, and that's they call the La Llave del Golfo. And that's because Cuba is very strategically positioned, not only in the Caribbean, but also the Gulf of Mexico. So this is the largest enclosed body of water in the Atlantic, 60 million residents, major cities, Veracruz, Tampa, New Orleans, Houston, Havana. And this positioning has made Cuba very important historically as well. It's why the Spanish invested so much in Havana as a sort of transshipment point to get plundered wealth from the Americas back to Spain using the Gulf Stream. What makes Cuba so challenging, right? There are many reasons, but it's also a fantastic place to work, mostly because of this very engaged scientific community. So here are some reasons. The population is shrinking as well. So there's a considerable brain drain. We're seeing this all over the Caribbean. Cuba's lost about 2 million residents since 2021. So people have left, and there is some desperation. And of course, you've probably been reading the news with the geopolitical strife that's going on in the Caribbean. All eyes are on Cuba now and how they respond. Getting to this presentation, Cuba also owes a lot of money. So they are a very high biodiversity, very high indebted country. This provides some opportunities, and that I'll get to. And you can see as well that tourism has plummeted as well. And another issue with the currency is that there are two of them. And the Cuban government trades at the Cuban peso, which is on the books listed at 25 to 1, but on the street, it can go up to 400 to 1. So imagine there's considerable inflation, but also a lot of uncertainty in terms of dealing with the Cuban banking system and their own currency. Why now? Well, we're seeing considerable climate impacts in the Caribbean. The 2023 bleaching event was severe. Cuba until then was sort of a hope spot, but their corals got it too. We saw considerable bleaching. There's a disease that's affecting corals. Pardon me if I talk about corals, but that's my passion. And volatility, obviously the political volatility. But there is an opportunity to jump on, which is an endowment from the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund via the Caribbean German Development Bank that's been on the books since 2018. And this is to create a conservation trust fund. So there is capital there and $10 million that needs to be matched. And I'll talk you through a bit how we're going to do this through a partnership with the Cuban Ministry of Science, Technology, Environment, and Wildlife Conservation Society. So I was mentioning earlier how we sort of flip things on their head. So our CFA Incubator was based initially on an idea of Cuba of debt restructuring. So creating a debt conversion for nature for Cuba. This seemed and will be a very tangible idea, given that Cuba owes so much sovereign debt, particularly to the Paris Club. So our application focused on how could we leverage Cuba's high level of biodiversity, their inability, insolvency to pay back a lot of this debt to create conservation outcomes. The realization was that, well, if you don't have a place to put that money and a sort of independent trust that could handle that funding, well, then you're just spinning your wheels. So at the time, we looked up a lot of this debt, and we found that Cuba had $11.1 billion of debt owed to the Paris Club. This is a consolidation of 16 countries, if I'm not mistaken, mostly European. And we found out in January of last year that this debt was forgiven in one shot, at least $8.5 billion of it. This was pretty exciting. It showed that there was willingness from these countries to realize that Cuba is not going to pay this debt back, but that Cuba's natural capital could present an opportunity to restructure or at least forgive some of the additional debt owed to the Paris Club. So we moved in this direction, and we started efforts to reach out to sort of peel off some of these other countries to forgive their share of the debt. Of course, there's the specter of the current U.S. administration, which is spooking a lot of countries out of engaging with Cuba. In fact, they've put an embargo on any country now that's dealing with Cuba. This is part of a strategy to really starve Cuba out. I found out a month ago that this agreement that was agreed to in January of last year was essentially rescinded. And so this press release from the Paris Club website you see on the right, last year was talking about how they forgave $8.5 billion of the $11.1 billion. So this is what makes Cuba so very tricky, that while the system is quite stable, there is so much sort of lack of transparency in terms of how Cuba can get out of these holes that they're in. We did find out as well that Spain, as part of their Paris Club debt, forgave $375 million for Cuba, and that I don't think has been rescinded. The problem with this one is that there was no conservation agreement, and so that was a bit disappointing in that we see these debt restructurings as an ideal opportunity to inject more funding into conservation in Cuba. What one component we knew about was this conservation trust fund and an endowment program that was established by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which is essentially a regional conservation trust fund in its own right. In 2012, they committed $100 million to 12 Caribbean nations, you can see them on the map, to create their own conservation trust funds. And most of them have been very successful in creating the governance structures. They're up and running. Cuba's is not. So Cuba's been hanging. In 2018, CBF secured $10 million from the German Development Bank specifically for Cuba. So this is a wonderful piece of leverage. This creates an inevitability that will create and get this conservation trust fund running, because we're talking $10 million. It needs to be matched. And there is so much potential, not just in terms of debt conversions, but licensing fees, national tourism fees, philanthropy, industry to get into Cuba. I direct an MPA network called the Red Golfo, which engages Cuba, Mexico, and the United States in transboundary conservation. And there is a lot of interest from industry to fund the three countries that share the Gulf of Mexico. So the need is there. The urgency is there, as I've shown. The sticking point is the stipulation that, and any donor would request this, that Cuba create a non-governmental independent entity to manage this fund. That in Cuba is very tricky, because in Cuba, everything is run by the government. There is no nonprofit sector. There are a couple societies that run independently, but even then, they're essentially, their boards are all government representatives. So this is a sticking point that we're moving past now. What would this sort of endowment do for Cuba, or how could it help Cuba? And where could funding come from into this independent entity? Well, there's a list that's only partial of how we could get more funding into this entity that's required to fund conservation in Cuba. The CBF has freed up $1 million of this $10 million that's now with the UNDP Small Grants Program. That's just a sort of flash opportunity to get some of this funding moving, but it's not a permanent fix. So we are working with WCS and SIGMA and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. We just finished up this work plan last month, which is a 2-year work plan built along 3 different milestones. The first being to create a roadmap. This will be starting this summer, be traveling to Havana in April. This is going to look at the legal institution, financial institutions, look at frameworks that might work, basically taking a sort of look inside the Cuban system to see who could host, who would be involved in this trust fund, how it would work. Milestone 2, this came from the Cubans. They want to do an exchange program with the Belize Fund for Nature. They see it as being very replicable for Cuba. It's had a lot of success. It's based on a 2022 blue bond for about $200 million over 20 years. It also funds government projects. About 40% of the fund funds Belize government projects. So that would probably work pretty well in Cuba. Right now, any international funding that comes into Cuba is managed. So there's no cash going to projects in Cuba. It's only managed. Milestone 3 will focus really on the stakeholder mapping, how this fund will work. So we have to create the governance framework. We have to have meetings inside of Cuba to see who would be involved. This is what anyone has done with their conservation trust funds. So this wraps up really year 1. Year 2, we'll focus on drafting the actual framework, using best practices, drafting the measurement and metrics plan for gauging success. We have had some success raising some funding for this phase, but we're nowhere near what we need. This is going to be a huge effort, a lot of trips to Havana. So we're looking for about another 100K, at least just for getting going on this year, just the meetings. I'm working with Jim Tolosano to create this governance structure. So we're looking for raising that funding soon, because we don't have enough to get through this next 2 years. Again, this is an inevitable sort of proposition. So This work will result in this new government non-governmental entity that we're very excited about. What have we learned during this incubator? Quite a bit, and we've learned that failure is an opportunity. So our initial focus was looking at this debt conversion that all flipped on its head. We engaged a large community at SIGMA in the incubator. They attended all of the webinars at the beginning, so they got a lot of learning out of the program about their own CTF, about international conservation. This is a photo here with Ulises Fernandez and the team from SIGMA. When we first pitched the idea, I remember when I proposed this idea, it's tricky getting anything greenlit in Cuba. And I called Ulises and said, we're going to apply. And he said, go for it. He needed 10 days, got the approvals, and then we're off and running. This kind of trust fund is critical for particular countries like Madagascar, like Cuba, right, where you do have a lot of political, economic uncertainty. Why? Because a trust fund creates that neutral mechanism to get funding into the country that has a governing board that's neutral. In the case of Cuba, there are going to be government representatives on the board. We want that, but there has to be some level of independence as well, and neutrality in governing how this fund is run. The CTF, but also this idea of debt forgiveness, I think is a really good model for countries with high levels of biodiversity and debt. I'd like to see more science, more research on how debt forgiveness could work, short of just restructuring. So I'm kind of looking a bit more at that. That might be the case for Cuba. So I'm open to ideas on how we negotiate that. If it is a case of just straight up forgiveness, how do you create these conservation outcomes? That's it from me. It's been a wonderful experience. Again, thanks to the donors for the learning. I'm really excited for these next 2 years of work. We essentially have 3 years to get this done, but we're starting ASAP. So I'm open to any questions about the process, about the outcomes. We can put them on the chat, but you can also reach out to me here at my email address and my website. Thanks a lot.
Fernando, thank you so much for the presentation. And maybe Stephanie can just put Fernando's email into the chat so people can reach out. I love the parallel you're making with Madagascar, the Madagascar Biodiversity Fund, which I was involved with, years ago when it was just getting started, has been incredibly successful, and it's actually provided some really core funding to the protected area network through a time when, with political upheaval, there was basically no money coming from the government to support the parks. And so conservation trust funds can be really important, really almost essential for that stability of funding. So really value your work for this and value the time and effort you're putting in here. So again, congratulations on getting this going, and congratulations on being a dynamic incubator participant, moving and adapting to the opportunity and the challenges. A couple questions coming up that I'll share with you here. One I found really interesting, which is, has there been an upside to the fact that Cuba's been, cut off in a way, financially from the rest of the Western world and politically in many ways from the US? Are there benefits to nature or, the island that you can describe?
Absolutely. And that's why I like working there, right? So you have very low tourism pressure, low manufacturing pressure, and so most of the natural systems are in remarkably good shape. Not only the isolated ones. I'm working now at a site called Laguna de Maya, which is 45 minutes east of Havana, and we're seeing all 3 species of acropora, including acropora prolifera, which is a hybrid species. So you see in general, and I recommend people visit Cuba and see for themselves, really beautiful habitats of very, in some cases, you can dive right off the shore and see beautiful coral reefs. while in the rest of the Caribbean, there's, in considerably more tourism pressure. So that'd be the big one. I think as well, just a science community that just works very hard, that is very efficient. So a lot of the projects that I run in Cuba, we're getting a lot out of high conservation to cost ratio because Cuban scientists work together, they share resources. So you see those benefits. The fear is, if there is a big opening or an invasion, that's going to get gobbled up. So the key now, David, is to put these mechanisms in place while things are slow, right? While tourism is now at 1 million instead of 5 million. So that's our opportunity.
Right. To put those systems in place so that we can manage tourism as it grows, because it will eventually. And a place as beautiful and as valuable as the coast of Cuba. Okay, and so a couple other questions coming in. What what So can you tell more about how you would envision a kind of debt? You'd mentioned debt forgiveness, which usually doesn't come with, it could come with conditions, but the more traditional sort of debt for nature swap is some of the value saved could go into the conservation trust fund. What do you think is a viable path
Yeah.
forward? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to look into any commercial debt that might be on the books, and I wasn't able to find any. I think this is going to take a lot of creativity as well, because I know Cuba's highly indebted to China as well, and potentially Russia. So I think this is a case of having a little more eyes on this and having more conversations. My colleague Mark Spalding initiated conversations with Standard Chartered Bank to look at where there might be some low-hanging fruit, some smaller debt that could be on the books that we can look at. What I'm talking about is $11.2 billion just from the Paris Club, but there's more out there. So I think we need to find some of that and really make this case to these banks that it's now or never. Cuba's going to have a hard time paying any of this back. If there is any upheaval in Cuba now, as we're seeing in Venezuela, it's going to be even trickier. So I think it's just getting everyone to the table and looking a bit more into where this debt is and where we have some sort of easier approach. We have to see what's going to happen with this Paris Club debt. My guess is that it came off the books because of, it's just a guess. I don't think the Trump administration wanted to see Cuba get off the hook. We have to figure out what happened with that as well.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, we've only got about 2 minutes left, so maybe a couple of really snap questions. One from Carolyn about the German funding. Is it conditional on getting matching? And could you go to UNDP, for example, to help bring in maybe some GEF funds or GCF funds for that?
Yeah,
Again, time.
Good. My understanding is that it just can't be matched by German Development Bank funding. So that would be on the table, right? If we could bring in, and the German Development Bank is seeing this as an endowment. So we'd have to find some structure that sees this as an endowment. But I have to look into that. So thanks for the question. That's a good question for Caribbean Biodiversity
Great.
Fund.
And unusually, Karen, I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but please go ahead and ask your question. I saw you had one in the chat. If you can, go ahead, but maybe not possible. There you are. Yeah, great.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Fernando. Good to see you. Thanks, David. First, a comment. Yeah, that the idea of the match is that it is indeed new funding and different funding, but also to say the government of Cuba has been very interested and very receptive to being the match fund, which is definitely a good possibility. So I think the possibility of where the match funds comes from is out there. My question was on the processes for Madagascar versus Cuba. So Cuba is working with us as a regional conservation trust fund, an existing conservation trust fund, whereas Madagascar even with other trust funds around, started a new one. And I wondered if either one had an idea of what made more sense, if there were pros and cons to those two different processes.
Really interesting. Well, I can speak from the CFA's perspective real quick, but Fernando, maybe you have a comment. But we discourage the creation of new conservation trust funds when existing conservation trust funds are available because it takes so long and so much effort to put it in place. So if you do have a mechanism that works, kind of use that mechanism. But Tiny Meva, the other trust fund in Madagascar, has still done fine, and it's focused on communities, whereas the biodiversity trust fund is really focused on the national system of protected areas. So it shows that there's space for two. They collaborate quite well right now. And but there's opportunity for new programs to use those existing trust funds. Case of Cuba, Fernando, thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good one. And one I don't have the answer to, except I know the Cubans are very open to exploring other conservation trust funds. They want to look at Belize. They want to look at Bolivia. So I think this is a great time to dive into some of the other ones, looking at similarities between government systems, biodiversity systems, institutional systems, and see what lines up with Cuba. So this year is when we'll be able to do some of that. Um, I'm also looking at CBF as well. Maybe something regional would work well for Cuba. That's why I shift a lot to this Golfo, which is another regional conservation trust fund we're looking at. That can take away a lot of the political pressure. We still have that nut to crack, which is how do we get funding into Cuba? But hopefully this 3-year process is what we're going through can unveil some new opportunities to get funding into Cuba.
Right. Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for hanging in there and staying beyond the hour. Fernando, best of luck with this project. And it's been great having you as part of the incubator and wishing you huge success. So thank you all for joining. Hopefully we'll see you on the 12th. Until then.
Thank you, David.